I am a ranger in a national park. The government is hiding something. I spent nearly 2 decades patrolling the dense forests of Whispering Pines National Park as a ranger. The park, with its ancient trees and winding trails, was a haven for hikers and nature enthusiasts. However, the beauty of Whispering Pines masked a darker, more sinister presence. Before I became a ranger, I lived in a small town with my wife, Sarah, and our young daughter, Emily. Life was good until a tragic car accident took their lives, leaving me shattered and alone. Desperate to escape the memories, I sought solace in the wilderness, hoping the tranquility of nature could mend my broken heart. I found some measure of peace in the forest, but the scars of my loss never fully healed. It all started with the whispers. At first I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but the whispers grew louder and more coherent. They called my name, beckoning me deeper into the forest. Despite my better judgment, I followed the voices one night, only to find myself standing in a small clearing illuminated by the moon. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness. I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows, but when I shone my flashlight around, there was nothing there. As I stood there, trying to make sense of the situation, I noticed the trees around the clearing seemed to lean inward, as if listening to some silent command. The whispers grew more insistent, their tone shifting from beckoning to warning. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. It felt like the forest itself was alive, its ancient presence pressing down on me. Then there were the disappearances. Hikers would go missing without a trace. Search parties combed the forest, but they found nothing, no tracks, no clothing, no signs of struggle. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. I began to notice patterns in the disappearances. They always happened in the same areas, places where the underbrush was unusually thick and the trees seemed to loom closer together, as if conspiring to hide something. I spoke with the families of the missing, their faces etched with grief and confusion. They all described their loved ones as experienced hikers, familiar with the trails and well prepared for the wilderness. Yet, despite their experience, they had vanished without a trace. Each time a new case emerged, I felt a pang of helplessness, unable to provide answers or solace. One crisp autumn day, while patrolling a rarely visited section of the park, I stumbled upon a chilling sight. There, in a secluded glade, lay a scattering of bones. They were bleached white and arranged in a haphazard pattern, some half buried under fallen leaves. There were human bones mixed with those of animals. The sight sent a chill down my spine. I crouched down, examining the bones more closely. There were skulls, femurs, ribs, all mixed together in a macabre display. The animal bones included deer, foxes, and even smaller creatures like rabbits. The arrangement was bizarre, almost ritualistic. My mind raced with questions. How did these bones end up here? Who or what was responsible for this? I radioed in the discovery, and within hours, 2 unmarked vans arrived. Government officials, stern, unsmiling men in dark suits, emerged and quickly cordoned off the area. I watched as they methodically collected the bones, loading them into the vans with practiced efficiency. When I asked what was going on, I was met with cold stares and a curt, "This is classified." In the weeks following the Bonefield incident, I felt an ever-present sense of being watched. I would catch glimpses of a tall, shadowy figure out of the corner of my eye, only for it to vanish when I turned to look. At night, I heard footsteps outside my cabin. slow and deliberate, crunching on the gravel path. But when I stepped outside, my flashlight revealed only empty darkness. The sense of being watched grew stronger each night. I started keeping my rifle close at hand, feeling a gnawing paranoia that I couldn't shake. One particularly foggy evening, I saw the figure again, this time standing at the edge of the forest, just beyond the reach of my porch light. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long limbs and eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the mist. I aimed my flashlight at it, but the beam seemed to pass right through the figure, as if it were made of smoke. One evening, while on a routine patrol, I heard a howl unlike any I had ever heard before. It was a low, mournful sound that seemed to resonate deep within my bones. I followed the sound to a rocky outcrop overlooking a valley. There, silhouetted against the moonlight, was the figure of a massive creature. It stood on two legs, its eyes glowing a deep, unsettling red. The creature let out another howl before disappearing into the forest. The sound echoed in my ears long after it had faded. I recorded the howl on my phone, hoping to analyze it later. The sound was unlike any known animal call, filled with a haunting, almost sorrowful quality. When I played the recording for my colleagues, they were equally baffled. Some suggested it was a wolf with a damaged vocal cord, while others speculated it was a prank. But deep down, I knew it was something else, something that defied logical explanation. Not long after the howl, I came across an abandoned campsite. The tents were shredded, and the ground was littered with torn clothing and personal belongings. There was no sign of the campers, but deep clawed footprints were embedded in the soft earth. I took photos and made detailed notes, but when I submitted my report, it was quickly dismissed by my superiors. The official explanation was that a bear had attacked the campsite, but I knew better. The footprints were too large and too humanoid to belong to any bear. The campsite looked as though it had been hit by a tornado. Cooking utensils were scattered, backpacks ripped open, and food supplies shredded. I found a journal belonging to one of the campers, its pages filled with entries about their trip. The last entry was chilling. "We heard strange noises last night. There is something out there, watching us. We don't feel safe." I collected the journal as evidence, but it was later confiscated by the same government officials who had taken the bones. They told me it was for safety reasons, but I knew it was part of their ongoing cover-up. One night, while stargazing, I noticed strange lights in the sky. They hovered above the treetops, moving in patterns that defied explanation. I watched as the lights descended into the forest, disappearing among the trees. The next day, I ventured to the area where I had seen the lights, only to find the ground scorched and the trees singed. There was a metallic, almost burnt odor in the air. I collected samples and took photographs, but once again my report was ignored. The lights were mesmerizing, darting and weaving in the sky with an otherworldly grace. I tracked their movements with my binoculars, noting how they seemed to communicate through flashes and pulses of light. The descent into the forest was swift, and the subsequent investigation revealed a perfect circle of burnt ground, devoid of any vegetation. The trees around the circle were charred, their bark peeling away to reveal blackened wood. During a particularly harsh winter, I was assigned to check on the old, abandoned ranger cabins scattered throughout the park. One such cabin, nestled deep in the forest, had a reputation for being haunted. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I couldn't deny the eerie feeling that overcame me as I approached the cabin. Inside, the air was frigid, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. As I inspected the rooms, I found strange symbols carved into the walls and floor. The temperature plummeted further, and I heard faint, disembodied voices whispering unintelligible words. I quickly left the cabin, vowing never to return. The cabin felt like a time capsule. Frozen in the moment, it was abandoned. Cobwebs hung in the corners, and old furniture sat undisturbed, covered in a thick layer of dust. The symbols carved into the wood were unlike anything I had seen before, resembling a mix of ancient runes and abstract shapes. As I moved through the cabin, I felt an oppressive weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The whispers grew louder, filling my ears with a cacophony of unintelligible murmurs. I fled the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. One peculiar incident involved the sudden disappearance of a well-known trail. I had been patrolling a familiar path when I noticed something was off. The markers were missing, and the trail itself seemed to have vanished, replaced by dense underbrush that shouldn't have grown so quickly. It was as if the forest had swallowed the trail overnight. I spent hours trying to navigate back to familiar territory, feeling an ever-growing sense of disorientation and unease. The trail was one I had walked countless times, and I knew every twist and turn by heart. Yet, as I tried to follow it, I found myself in unfamiliar terrain, surrounded by thick underbrush and towering trees that seemed to close in around me. My compass spun wildly, and my GPS signal was inexplicably lost. Panic set in as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Eventually, I found my way back to a known trail, but the experience left me deeply unsettled. Another time, I noticed an unsettling silence in the forest. The usual sounds of wildlife were completely absent. No birds, no insects, nothing. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. As I ventured deeper, I found an area where the trees were charred and twisted, as if some intense heat had scorched them. The air was thick with the scent of burnt wood and something else, something foul and unidentifiable. The silence was oppressive, a deafening void that filled my ears. Even the crunch of my boots on the fallen leaves seemed muted. The charred area was vast, stretching for several acres. The trees were blackened, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes. The ground was littered with ashes and the remnants of incinerated plants. I took soil and plant samples, hoping to find some explanation, but my findings were inconclusive. The foul odor lingered, a mix of sulfur and decay that made my stomach churn. One summer, I was assigned to check on a cabin that had reportedly been vandalized. When I arrived at the location, there was no cabin. I double-checked my coordinates and even retraced my steps, but the cabin had seemingly vanished. I reported it to my superiors, who brushed it off as a navigational error on my part. But I knew every inch of that park, and I knew the cabin had been there just a week prior. The area where the cabin should have stood was now an empty clearing, with no signs of debris or remains. The ground was undisturbed, covered in the usual layer of pine needles and fallen leaves. I questioned locals and long-time park visitors, but no one could explain the cabin's disappearance. It was as if it had never existed. I searched the park archives for any record of the cabin, but all references to it had been mysteriously erased. The final straw came one stormy night. Thunder rumbled through the forest, and rain lashed against the windows of my cabin. As I sat by the fire, trying to shake off the feeling of dread, there was a loud knock at the door. I opened it to find a man, drenched and pale, with wild eyes. "You need to leave this place," the man gasped. "It's not safe. It's here." Before I could respond, the man was gone, swallowed by the stormy night. Grabbing my flashlight and my rifle, I ventured out into the rain, determined to find answers. As I trudged through the forest, the whispers returned, louder than ever. They led me to an old, abandoned ranger station deep in the woods. Inside, the air was damp and musty, filled with the scent of decay. In the center of the room, a trapdoor lay open, revealing a dark, gaping hole. With trepidation, I descended the rickety ladder. At the bottom, I found myself in a cavernous underground chamber. The walls were lined with strange symbols, and in the center of the chamber stood a grotesque statue of a creature that defied description. Part human, part beast, with eyes that seemed to follow me. Suddenly, the shadows moved. The tall, shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The creature was terrifyingly real, standing over 7 feet tall. Its skin was a mottled gray, stretched tight over sinewy muscles. Matted hair hung from its head, and its face was a nightmarish blend of human and animal features. Its eyes were deep-set and glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light. Jagged teeth protruded from its mouth, and its elongated fingers ended in razor-sharp claws. The creature let out a low, rumbling growl that echoed through the chamber. I raised my rifle, but the creature was upon me in an instant, its icy breath chilling me to the bone. I fired, but the bullet seemed to have no effect. Just as I felt the creature's claws closing around me, the chamber was flooded with light. Government agents, armed to the teeth, swarmed in and opened fire on the creature, forcing it to retreat into the shadows. I was escorted out of the chamber, shaken and bewildered. The agents refused to answer my questions, instead warning me to never speak of what I had seen. They were adamant, and their seriousness was terrifying. They made it clear that if I ever disclosed what I had witnessed, the consequences would be severe. The next day, my superior informed me that I was being transferred to a different park, far away from Whispering Pines. The transfer was sudden and without explanation, but I understood the unspoken message. The government wanted me as far away from the park and the cryptid as possible. Before I left, I tried to find out more. I spoke with colleagues and locals who had lived near the park for generations. Their stories were eerily similar to my experiences, filled with strange sightings and unexplained disappearances. One old man, who claimed to have seen the creature in his youth, told me it was an ancient being. Something not of this world, drawn to the forest by forces we couldn't comprehend. As I packed my belongings, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I knew the truth about Whispering Pines, but I also knew that the forest held its secrets tightly. The government was involved in a cover-up of monumental proportions. The bones, the disappearances, the creature itself, all swept under the rug, hidden from the public eye. As I drove away, the whispers followed me, a haunting reminder of the shadows in the pines. The memories of my encounters stayed with me, a constant, chilling presence in the back of my mind. I was left with more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. There is something ancient and malevolent lurking in the depths of Whispering Pines. It would continue to claim its territory, unnoticed by the outside world. Years later, in moments of quiet reflection, I sometimes wonder if I should have stayed, if I should have fought harder for the truth. But then I remember the chilling eyes of the creature and the cold warning of the government agents. I know that some secrets are too dangerous to uncover. The shadows in the pines will remain, whispering their dark tales to those who dare to listen.